Comedy Film Nerds Podcast.
All right, let's talk about this other doc that
Yes.
that was really cool. I've been wanting to see this, and Jim recommended that we talk about this for this episode. Rumble, the Indians Who Rock the World. Really well made doc. I think this will be nominated in the Oscar category for best docs.
Really? Oh.
Just because of how the production value on this stuff. I was like, because obviously, well, first of all, they spent a shit ton of money on licensing because it's all these big songs.
Yeah.
There's just no way that like that. And then when they were shooting, I was paying close attention to. So there's a lot of archival footage. There's a lot of heavily licensed. There's like archival like rock and roll TV shows. I know those aren't cheap. And then when they were showing like some of these people like today on their farms, I was like, man, that's a really nice aerial shot. I'm sure they're using a drone or whatever, but they had really nice footage. So Jim, what did you think of this film when you saw it?
I mean, for me, it was just incredibly inspiring just to learn a lot of these stories that I didn't know much of. I mean, heard of several of them, but a lot of them I hadn't heard of.
Now, this is all Native American musicians.
Right. Yeah.
And the thing about it is, like, some of them, huge names, bands or were good, amazing guitarists that were in all of these giant bands that were all Native American. So I didn't know that either. So that was the main hook for you. Was
What were some of the famous ones that surprised you?
Actually, I should have written everyone's name down.
That's all right. Well, there was Link Ward.
Right.
Like, I didn't.
Link Ray. Yeah.
Link Ray. I'm sorry, Link Ray. I didn't know. I mean, some of these. I'm gonna bring this up. Some of this, like, it's all this music that Link Ray does that boom boom boom, that song, which I believe is called Rumble.
Yeah.
That is, you've heard it 1,000 times. It is one of the most iconic guitar riffs out there. And I was like, oh, wow. And he talks about, and a lot of them talked about the era they grew up in. Oh, we didn't want to tell people we were Native because we would have, gotten shit or whatever, or violence or whatever the thing was. So it was like, we had to kind of keep our nativeness hidden. And that was a big part of it, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, and then hearing like Buffy St. Marie's story that she did. I mean, she was very political, and then all of a sudden she got shut down, and I think it came out that like Counter Pro Intel had been shut. The FBI had been shutting her down and taking care of her career, and that just rings so true today. A lot of Native musicians now have been writing, doing songs on Standing Rock and things like that, and it's just it's happening all over again. And yeah, it's hard to watch them because oh man, that was the same thing, but they really went at her hard, and that sucks.
Yeah, she had, and then, they're showing footage of her singing these like heavy anti-war songs, anti-Vietnam, anti-war songs, and she talked. I mean, you see footage. She's doing these giant shows, and then they just were like,
"You're done."
Nope. And
Would they shut down the shows?
No, they just shut down her career.
Yeah.
I mean,
oh, wow.
They got and this is back in you couldn't self-produce an album like you could today and just sell it online. It's like, so if a record label you're done. If they don't give you a record deal, you're done, and that's what they did. Which is like there's so much of that section of the film was so I felt the same way, like artists today. Who are trying to talk about, there's not a lot of artists today trying to talk about what's really going on in terms of the American war machine and all this other stuff. And so you saw how that was shut down. And then the other story that was really, what's his name there was? Jesse
Davis was one that really just stuck out to me, is just his skill as a guitarist, and then the story that his life is. It's always depressing when it's a tragic ending like it with him with heroin, and so I wish he was still around. I wish he was here to mentor a lot of the younger guys and gals that are getting into rock music. But when he was around, he did that solo on "Doctor My Eyes," and just I was listening, after the doc, I just listened to that song like 50 times. Like, oh, this is so great, it's so cool.
That was the cool part about it, like you say, Jim. So that's this famous Jackson Browne song, and you're like, that was that dude's riff? And Jax Brown tells the story. Oh, I needed this guy just came in and just did it. It was his. He goes, I need a guitar solo here, and he goes, okay, one take. It was just like another one of these completely iconic guitar riffs that you could play immediately, and everyone would know what that song is. To Jimi Hendrix. The also thing that was interesting for me was you got a really nice history lesson, especially about the tribes from the southeast part of the U.S.
Right, yeah. The Purifé and a few of the others. They had this group called Ulali, and they would sing like traditional songs from a few of the tribes in the southeast. And yeah, I was like, wow, those sound really like gospel. And if I finally figured it out from the documentary, I was like, oh, that's where gospel got the songs from. That's where they got the music from. And that happened in several different genres of music where it's like, oh, this just came from a specific tribe.
Yeah, and they were talking about a lot of the, I think it's Choctaw, were black. And they would because the history was that they took a lot of the native men, they shipped them out because they were warriors, and they were like, well, we can't have them here with any sort of insurgency. And then when they brought the African slaves in, then some of them, when they escaped or whatever, would get taken in by certain tribes, and that's why a lot of black people have native blood in them. And it was that was fascinating, and then that fed a lot of the blues. You know, like
yeah. And it was in a lot of things I didn't know. I just didn't know that. I was like, oh, okay, that beat comes from that.
So this documentary, it not only profiles the musicians, but goes into the history too.
Absolutely.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's one in particular, and I've heard of her before, Mildred Bailey. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she was a jazz singer before a lot of the big ones you've heard of. And she's the one that kind of brought the swing in terms of how to deliver the lyrics, and it came from her tribe in Idaho. She's from Idaho, Coeur d'Alene tribe. So you watch that and you're like, holy crap. It's like, that's incredible. And I'd heard her story before and I knew that. So it was like, oh, okay, yeah, I knew that. But it's amazing to understand how these influences have been there, but then even more shocking to realize I had no idea. And it was really cool to see it presented in this documentary.
Well, that's to me why I think it should get a nomination. Is it does that thing I've said this a million times on this show, that a good documentary does. It brings you into a world you weren't aware of, or a world you were aware of, and gives you new information about it.
Right.
So it's giving you all this great history and background, and then it's telling you something that you already knew and going, actually, it was this, and you're like, no, what? So it's a really cool historical documentary that tells you about historical points and events and bands, but all of these crazy influences, and one of the guys who was on I think it was what's his name? Was it Robbie?
Oh yeah, I forget his name.
Yeah, who played with Bob Dylan. And so you're hearing his point of view of when Dylan went electric. He was hired when Dylan would go, oh, I'm going to start doing electric, and was on the road, and they're getting booed because everyone's like, and Dylan says, well, we're going to videotape this, and he goes, or film it. Obviously back then wasn't video, but and you're seeing people yell out, Judas, you sell out, because all the folk singers aren't allowed to go electric. That's selling out. And when Dylan went electric, people were booing him, and this.
Robbie Robertson,
yeah. Who was young. He started playing when he was 16 or something, and he was kicking ass, and so he was, got in these bands, and then Dylan hires him, and he goes, man, that was a interesting way to make a buck. You'd go play a show, get booed, pack up your gear, go to the next town, get booed, and a lot of the like a Rolling Stone, and then Dylan had he was like a fuck you, that was all right, fuck you, you're gonna boo me. There's this great piece, and they got great footage of them all getting in a limo after a gig or whatever, and Dylan's rolling up the window going, oh, why are you booing me, man?
He's like, bumming me out, man.
Yeah.
It's also you pay the money for the ticket. He's gonna play electric. So you're paying the money just for the privilege of booing him for an hour and a half
and
or 2 hours.
And the thing that's so funny, it just shows how history You know.
Maybe folk singer fans have a little too much money and free time.
Yeah.
I think
Then
that's
go watch,
the takeaway.
Yeah, then go watch a folk singer.
Yeah.
You
Do these people really support like MTV's Unplugged
Yeah,
series?
yeah,
They're like,
you-
finally,
yeah,
we're back.
geez.
We're back, guys. We got this.
You know, buy some hemp rope, you angry hippie.
Jesus. There's no other you only have one taste in music?
Yeah.
So
and also too, even that's without social media and all of those ways to connect. It's even more fascinating that would happen in every venue. That like, all right, you know, because you didn't hear like, oh, it happened at like Madison Square Garden, he got booed, and then like, all right, well, let's go to the next one and boo him, and let's go to the next one and boo him. But so it got into the consciousness that folk singers shouldn't use electric, and then that fascinates me. That then people would go out of their way to buy a ticket and then boo for 2 hours.
Well, I think it's part of it is because there wasn't social media, you didn't know that last night or last week in this other town he got booed. You just bought your ticket to go see Bob Dylan, and
Right.
you show up and you're like, huh? Like, you know what I mean? There isn't this infrastructure of everybody. Today, that would be online
Instantly.
that night.
Yes.
Everyone would weigh in on it, and you would then make a decision. And then the next town would be a bunch of people cheering with like, you know,
They're holding up their phones.
right, exactly, and maybe signs or whatever, or like "fuck the folk people" or something. You know, like there'd be some-
Electricity's great.
yeah, exactly. You know, dressing up as guitars. I don't know what, but
That would be great. Cosplay at a Bob Dylan concert.
but no, it was really cool too because there's interviews with like Martin Scorsese and Iggy Pop and everybody talking about
Influences, yeah.
yeah, which is cool. So it's a combination of, it's like a really good rock doc, right? It's a really good historical lesson. It's a really good Native American doc.
Well, you can't make a big rock doc without Martin Scorsese.
Right.
One thing that struck me about it too, though, is that most of these musicians were in isolation, though. As far as like, it wasn't like a group of Native Americans that had all like pitched and helped the other one forward, helped the other. It's like they've heard like through the grave, you are, maybe after the fact even, and that's kind of one like something I'd like to see, you know, to get further on, is to see more, I guess like a movement of Native musicians moving forward, and just all across entertainment genres. They did a previous movie called Real Engine, the production company behind this, and that kind of did the same thing, but with Hollywood and TV. And
INJUN or ENG?
INJUN, yeah, and then REEL.
Got it.
Yeah.
Because wasn't the production company like
Yeah,
Resolution or something like, and it's REZ.
That was like when I first moved out here. They were out here filming that, and
Well, it's kind of the thing. It was like I kept thinking about the FNX show we're doing of like, you know, no one since you I mean, you said when I interviewed you, a lot of the comics have said this, but you were like, no, there's never been a Native stand-up comedy series. This is only the second TV special. You said that you and Mark said that, and it was like, wow, I was thinking the same thing, like in watching the film, like these guys didn't know each other, and then they all kind of, hey, oh wow,
yeah.
And I was like, I kept thinking about this show, like I hope this show like gets, you know, this community of Native comics together and stuff like that, because I was thinking about this yesterday and this morning as I'm watching footage from Sunday, watching the ladies of Native comedy, and I was like, you know, there's like a separate circuit. That's why, like I worked with you and I have heard of Mark Yaffe because you guys work clubs,
Right.
But a lot of Native comics, as I'm finding out, and as you told me too, and especially talking, they do tribal shows and they do casinos, and they're not really in the club circuit.
Yeah.
So it's like a whole separate circuit, and why not expand that, or I don't know, mold them together or get them mainstream? I don't know, like get it all. I like seeing, one of the things that was cool about this doc is these musicians taking the music from their tribe or their culture and infusing it into the mainstream, and then you see this sort of melding of cultures makes this amazing art. I don't know, that's how I see it. So
Yeah, I mean that was one thing, but we've had discussion with some other more current bands that people get upset when they do that. So they'll take like some music and then they'll combine it with like electronic music, and a lot of people don't like it. Like, oh, that's inappropriate. Those songs aren't meant for that.
The common denominator here seems to be electricity.
That's
Yeah.
the problem.
Yeah, you
So we
can't,
need a Mennonite tour.
Yeah, people are actually mad at Tesla.
Yeah, so there's a band, Tribe Called Red. They do like dubstep. They're up in Canada. And they're great. I love their music, but I have a good friend that's really into the powwow circuit. He just doesn't like it. He's like, this is not. And I get where he's coming from totally. So, but there's different perspectives on it, and